Hi, welcome to the Kitchen Shrink, where real talk meets real life. We're Kat and Cal, two therapists helping you make sense of relationships, emotions, and everything in between. Pull up a chair. Let's sort through it together. Hi, everyone. Thanks for pulling up a seat with us at the table. Our listener's question today is, I've been hearing everyone talk about trauma lately, and honestly, I'm confused. I've never been abused. I wasn't in a war, and nothing that bad happened to me, but I still struggle with anxiety, people-pleasing, overthinking, and feeling like something's wrong with me. Am I traumatized? Are we just calling everything trauma now? How do I know the difference?
That's a great question, and I'm really glad you wrote in on that. Today is going to be the first series, or the first episode in a two-part series on trauma. And today we're just going to kind of delve into what is trauma? What's it look like? So when most people hear the word trauma, they think of horrific events, war, abuse, terrible accidents, and those are definitely absolutely trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But trauma is actually, it's much broader than that. It's pretty vast. So it's any experience that overwhelms your ability to cope, and it leaves your brain and your body stuck in a survival mode. So in other words, trauma isn't just what happened to you, it's what happened inside you because of what happened to you.
That's right.
That's a great way. I'm going to say that again real quick. Trauma isn't just what happened to you. It's what happened inside you because of what happened to you.
Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of trauma, I think there's some misconception around it, because everybody's able to identify when they experience what we call a big T trauma, or what our listener was saying of like war or abuse.
Right.
But there's also little T trauma, which I call death by 1,000 paper cuts. And oftentimes these can happen in just like normal everyday families where our parents are in no way trying to hurt us.
Right.
They hurt us unintentionally by trying to shape us through their belief systems. And that can sometimes, the way it impacts us, create some distressing and disturbing beliefs about ourselves, rooted in shame or not good enough, or fear of rejection or abandonment.
That's a good point. And I think if we want to just give a little more description on big T versus little t, and I say we work on all the T's in between there. So big T trauma is typically classified as like a single or even a repeated event that's life-threatening. I mean, it could be serious injury. It provokes intense fear and helplessness, and it often meets the diagnostic criteria for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then the little T trauma is stressful, harmful, could be developmentally damaging, and it's not necessarily life-threatening, but it could be chronic and relational. So like you said, I mean, it's not always something that happens to you. It could be something that didn't happen, like you didn't get the love or the nurturing and the compassion that you needed and deserved as a child. So that can look like emotional neglect, repeated criticism, or even bullying, betrayal, any type of unstable caregiving. Those they're all trauma. And, we were talking earlier about when somebody, says, oh, I had this trauma, and then somebody else wants to say, well, I had this trauma. And, I always say nobody wants to win the trauma Olympics here. Like, everybody's hard is the hardest thing. I believe that.
Yes, like your biggest hurt is the biggest hurt you've ever felt, and therefore it's in line with somebody else's biggest hurt, even if they happen from two different external events.
Yes.
And so it doesn't matter if I lost my hamster to I lost a parent to my car broke down.
Right.
If it's extreme to you and the biggest extreme you've experienced, that deserves credit.
Right.
We don't get to rank how you got to that feeling on its own,
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's hard is the hardest, I think. A little bit more on, big T trauma, like the severity is like, it's really typically acute. It's very obvious, and it's externally recognizable. And I think about asking my youngest daughter, hey, in your lifetime, what do you consider one of the biggest traumas? Which is a very risky question as a parent. And she actually said COVID. And I agree, because so many kids were left at home not finishing the school year, or they were online teaching. And I think there's some, big T down to little t trauma in that for kids, and that it's not always externally recognizable. But I think as a world collectively, we all experience some type of trauma around the COVID-19 coming in. It impacted all of us on some level. So that's, big T stuff is usually externally recognizable, where the little t can be subtle it can be cumulative, and it's sometimes minimized because it's invisible. And that can be where you grow up in a home where you never felt like you could do anything right. You had a critical parent or an emotionally immature parent. We don't always see that and think, oh my God, that's a huge trauma versus like this major car accident I saw. But that, I mean, the difference is the big T stuff, it leaves you at high risk for intrusive memories, nightmares, flashbacks, hyperarousal, avoidance. And then little T, that can come in like chronic shame, is what you were talking about. Low self-worth, relationship attachment problems, emotional dysregulation, depression, anxiety. I mean, all trauma can impact that way, but the little T stuff, that ongoing stuff, can oftentimes leave us with a truth about ourselves that just simply isn't true.
Yeah. And bullying, I think, is a good one to bring up too, because sometimes even your caregivers at home can understand what you're going through, and people being powerless to stop something bad happening to you because we can't pull the other kid out of school or whatever else, that those things, even well-intentioned caregivers who are trying to provide support, if it can't change the circumstances, sometimes those circumstances still end up leaving us feeling unprotected and unsafe.
Yeah. And I think too, when we look back, oftentimes I'll see a big jump towards healing in session when a client comes in with just such anger and blame and resent towards their parents for whatever emotional neglect or maybe just straight up physical, sexual abuse, whatever it is. At some point, depending on the abuse and the trauma, people tend to realize that parents are fully flawed, historically shaped humans. And, sometimes we can come out with they did the best they could. That can be a big reach for some people, but there can be healing in knowing that we don't always know what your parents brought along with them. And again, this is my statement about trauma. It doesn't make it, it doesn't excuse, well, how do I want to say that? Like, trauma explains your behavior. That's what it is, but it doesn't excuse it.
Right.
So, sometimes people just want that why. And the trauma piece, we may not know the why, but we do know that it doesn't, it explains it, but it doesn't excuse it. So,
yes. And I think that's something that I actually have a little bit of a different experience with my clients, where when they've gone through something really, with that their parents have caused, historical is important. I think, they look at like, well, they couldn't help themselves and all of those things. And they almost use it as a way to be like, so it's my fault for not being so understanding. And what you're saying is so true, that there is a balance between, we can have compassion without excusing the behavior, that both things have to exist. And duality on this planet, the more we can get comfortable in the duality that two things can simultaneously exist at the same time, then we don't have to villainize our parents to be able to accept that what they did was not what we needed. And we also don't have to villainize ourselves for not being more understanding that our parents were doing the best that we can. That both things can be true. Our parents can be doing the best they can and fall short in ways where we deserve, some level of accountability from them, or we have needs or wants around that. And
yeah, absolutely. So let's shift a little bit. We're kind of trying to describe about trauma, but trauma it's an experience that overwhelms your ability to cope. Your brain and your nervous system go into survival mode, and sometimes they never fully realize the danger is past. And this is where we see, some PTSD, some post-traumatic stress disorder, where you were, let's take in a war, right? There's a lot of gunfire, and then you're here and you hear the 4th of July coming up, you hear a firework go off. Like, your brain is probably saying, oh, hey, I'm safe because I'm here and I'm watching the 4th of July fireworks. But your body and your nervous system have not caught up. They don't know that there isn't a threat.
And I think this is the thing that happens in session too, where in our brains, we can logically process something, and then we just don't understand why we have the anxiety underneath or the stress underneath. It's like, if I know that I'm safe, and if I know my partner's healthy, and if I know that my kids are not trying to dysregulate me, or the firework is not gunfire, then why is my body reacting? And that's why it's so important to understand the loop that our body uses from the conscious. We'll talk about conscious mind, subconscious mind, often in therapy, but it's really, the brain is sort of that like conscious, takes in the information and then process it through the nervous system. But the nervous system is unconscious. The nervous system is just taking that information. It fires off as, is this safe or is this dangerous? So if there is any subtle cue that you could be in danger, then all of a sudden your nervous system is responding to that danger as opposed to what's actually in front of you. And that's how the nervous system works, you guys. The nervous system is unconscious and unprocessed. And so when you feel the anxiety, that's coming from your nervous system. All those electrical impulses that are just coursing through your body because a trigger meant something in the brain, and it happens so quickly that you're in one conversation with your partner, next thing you know, you're crying or exploding or retreating or running away, and you're like, I don't even know what just happened.
I mean, literally, your brain, it doesn't know if you are in that moment that you're safe with somebody or if you are in that actual trauma in the moment, even if it was 40 years ago.
Yeah, and it's why we talk about how trauma gets stored in the body.
That's right. So if you guys haven't read The Body Keeps Score, it's not a light read, but it's by Bessel van der Kolk. Many trauma survivors find that even after years, we're talking like you could have something 40 years later and you've done a lot of talk therapy, your body can still feel tense, reactive, and shut down. That's because trauma is not only stored in the memory, it's held in muscle, fascia, breath, and your nervous system patterns. So without engaging the body in your healing, these imprints can absolutely remain stuck. And so you have a really good one. I'm gonna give a quick analogy for listeners on the nervous system versus the brain. So imagine your home smoke detector, right? We all have those, or you should if you don't. It's supposed to go off when there's a real fire. So trauma can make that smoke detector so sensitive that it starts blaring every time you make some toast. The alarm isn't broken, it just becomes overprotective. So healing isn't about ripping the smoke detectors out of the ceilings, don't do that. It's about recalibrating so it can tell the difference between burnt toast and a real fire.
And I use the barking dog analogy.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Where with when I'm talking to clients trying to explain how the brain works, that there are times where we get an inputted information. It's almost like the doorbell rings or somebody's outside and the dog is barking. Well, sometimes the dog barks because there's actual danger. Sometimes the dog is barking at the mailman. And so our system can respond like a barking dog. And when the amygdala, which is that big feeling part of your brain, starts to get reactive, your thinking brain, your logical processing brain can sometimes even like dysregulate, just stop working, not dysregulate, disconnect and just stop working. And so if that's how we describe it to kids is your amygdala is like your barking dog, and then your prefrontal cortex, which is your logical thinking, is your wise owl. Well, when the dog starts barking, the wise owl flies away, and that is Dan Siegel, right?
Yeah.
And so when the wise owl flies away, all of a sudden, all you have left is your emotional responses. And that's why you're sitting there going, why did I just act like that? And you're blaming yourself and feeling shame over the actual responsive process of the body that prioritizes keeping you safe before anything else. And keeping you safe is not a reality because we're not being chased by a lion and there isn't actual danger, but your body does not know that. So the barking dog just needs some internal support in understanding what truly is danger, which is why many people get frustrated with, I've done so much talk therapy and it's not working, because integration into the body happens through more somatic work like EMDR, like hypnosis, like body movement, like every time you reach safety after you've had a big event and you're like, okay, my partner and I are still connected, or I didn't, something terrible didn't happen. You sit with that internal part of your system and you're like, hey, we're okay, because your body has to see the safety after the incident to help it train itself out of danger.
It can take a lot of those experiences too. So, I mean, the problem isn't that after the danger is over. The problem is that after the danger is over, the brain and the nervous system, they don't always get the memo. So instead of returning to a calm, regulated state, we can still stay on high alert. That's why somebody that has unresolved trauma, we're going to go over some signs that you may have that. They might be startled or easily. They can have panic attacks or even struggle to trust people and they can feel emotionally numb and react to everyday situations as if they're life-threatening, right? Because the nervous system, it's not overreacting. It's still trying to protect you.
Yeah. And we often kind of don't quite understand necessarily what trauma does sometimes look like in the body, because it is overthinking, it can be people pleasing, it can be perfectionism, emotional numbing and shutting down or avoiding,
anxiety, difficulty trusting people, difficulty relaxing even if you know everything's okay, shame,
hyperindependence,
emotional
needing
flooding,
constant reassuring. That's a big one. People who are just always looking for external validation to be able to meet an internal need.
what trauma does to the brain and the body too. We can talk about the 4 responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I'm not a fighter. I'm definitely a flight. I'm out of there. If the heat gets turned up or something is like, whoop, too much, I'm a flight.
Oh, we need to talk about this. We need to resolve it. Like I'm much more anxious in that way. I've calmed down, but definitely, I wouldn't say that I'm a fighter, but I'm a fixer, a connector. Well, yeah.
Well, so then there's the freeze and then there's the fawn. And I don't know if a lot of people know about the fawn. That is when something happens and your nervous system just gets jacked. Oftentimes you will fawn, which means you go to that person that just maybe hurt you or said something that was very triggering, and you apologize. You do anything you can to make that situation go away, to make that person happy. So let's talk about some trauma myths. Okay. Like we kind of talked about that earlier. It wasn't bad enough, or other people had it worse, or I should be over this by now. Or if I don't remember it, it can't affect me, which again, that goes to the body keeps score. Even if you think you've talked your way through it in therapy, unless we're really looking at the impact on the body and the nervous system, it's going to show up someday. And you're probably going to lose your ever living. And then you're going to go later, why did I respond that way?
Yeah, I think it's also a myth that your parents had to, overtly abuse you for you to be able to say that you experienced trauma.
Yeah. Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about trauma bonding too, because this can show up where people just don't understand, right? So why somebody stays. Well, trauma bonding can weave together cycles of abuse with periods of calm or even affection. So those moments of kindness or closeness mixed with fear and harm can cause victims to feel a powerful attachment to the abuser that's intense. It's salvageable and it feels unbreakable. People can stay in those trauma bond relationships for a long time.
Yeah, I explain that like addiction. And I do wish we had more compassion, because there is so much judgment around why somebody would stay with somebody who's abusive to them. But until you've experienced, there's just some things that until you've really experienced it or heard enough people who've experienced it, you can't really understand how much it keeps you stuck. That it can feel like your feet are in mud, like you're trying to walk forward but you're actually getting nowhere. A trauma bond feels like an addiction. The highs of the experience, of the connection, the memories you share, the love bombing, the connection, it's so fireworks and explosions and goodness that your brain believes, oh, maybe this time will be different. It grabs onto the high and forgets the low of the other side of the cycle, where there's the discard or the abuse or the screaming or the yelling. And so once it repeats, you always go, oh my gosh, this is the lowest low I've ever felt. How do I forget this low?
Right.
But it's because of the way the return continues. Feels like. And so, yeah, like, I think like the falling star at Adventureland, which nobody would understand if they're not in Iowa.
You're not from Iowa.
Not here anymore. But just a ride that goes up and down and around in a circle. And so it just, as quick as it goes down, it goes back up. And then you're like, oh, maybe I'm okay. It's still destabilizing because there's no consistency.
Word. That's a great word.
But the other thing we have to understand about trauma is that you do get trained into the loops. Like the falling star, you get trained into the cycle from childhood. So to be able to accept a safe or calm life would be hard because it wouldn't feel comfortable, because you're used to the activating, you're used to the anxiety. The anxiety, the being there actually becomes a comforting tool. You're used to the hypervigilance. You're used to the abandonment. You're used to the emotional numbing, the running away, right? Because you need those activating events to have that nervous system reaction so that you're okay, because that's homeostasis in the body.
Right.
Just because we're miserable doesn't mean we're not comfortable. And so change can also be hard, not only because it lives in the body, but because you get very used to the consistency and the predictability of the emotional responses that your body has learned based off your experiences.
Right. So if you're listening today and you're like, oh my gosh, she just explained me to the T. Well, stay tuned. We're not done yet today, but next week is going to kind of help you with some tools to work through some of this trauma. This week, really just kind of making sense of it. So regardless of the type, it all disrupts the brain's ability to process emotions and to maintain emotional stability. We've got 3 different, big types of trauma. We've got the acute trauma that comes from like a single distressing event, like a car accident, natural disaster or attack. That's kind of characterized by like a suddenness of and intensity, often leaving the person to feel shock and vulnerability. Chronic trauma occurs due to prolonged exposure to distressing situations or repeated exposure to traumatic events, like ongoing domestic abuse, childhood neglect, bullying, and long-term illness. Complex trauma, there's no escape from that. It's characterized by exposure to multiple repeated traumatic events, and often they are in an interpersonal context, such as childhood abuse, ongoing domestic abuse. So this type of trauma typically occurs within closer relationships, especially during formative years. And it can have a diverse impact on an individual's sense of self and their emotional regulation and ability to trust in others. This is the stuff where we see clients that have this really negative core belief about themselves that, even if it's nobody was ever there for me and they had emotionally immature parents, which is another book, or neglectful parents, they can learn that they're unworthy of love, right? Like, I'm not lovable or I'm not good enough. And man, guys, even like I've always said, what you grew up with, that trauma is absolutely not your fault. It's not your responsibility. Two truths: as an adult, you are responsible for getting out of that stuck trauma and getting out of that pain. So that's what we're kind of looking at for next week's, is to help you to find some ways to get out of that.
Yeah, remember, your nervous system does not speak English, it speaks experience. And it is okay. Like, as a trauma survivor myself, I can say it is okay to hear that it's my responsibility to heal it. And that's really frustrating because I explain it like it's like inheriting a mansion, but it's a hoarder house. So you go inside and there's so much you have to unpack in order to get to the beauty of the goodness of what you have. And it's not your fault that what was left there should have never been put there and should not be your responsibility. But because it is worth uncovering the mansion underneath, the beauty of your existence, the glory of like why you're here and the purpose you can have, and why you don't deserve to be steeped in shame and pain and whatever. So there is a form of acceptance that has to come around the fact that if you were traumatized, yes, you do have more work than other people. And while that's not fair, it is a worthy journey towards like uncovering the mansion underneath, if
Absolutely.
that makes sense. So.
Yep, we see that a lot. And then sometimes we'll have clients that come in that had that, that really quick car accident, like this acute trauma. I've had a lot of people come in, and I use EMDR. I know, Kat, you use EMDR. You use hypnosis. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And we're not going to forget that happened, but the purpose of EMDR is to lower your disturbance rate. You might come in at a 10 out of 10 about a car accident or even just ongoing trauma as a kid. And EMDR's purpose is to get your disturbance rate as close to, if not zero. And it doesn't mean you're going to forget that happened. It just takes the sting out of it, and you think differently about it, and you begin to think differently about yourself. Yeah. So, I don't know.
And that's what I would say too, is you can do it through your own like somatic work and things like that. We're going to talk about a lot of this next week, but it is helpful to find an EMDR therapist. It's probably a little bit harder to find clinical hypnosis, but both of those things access the subconscious mind, which means we can input it into the processing system, and it's just a little bit faster and a little bit easier. So.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of your brain, this kind of goes back to the nervous system. If you think of your brain as the command center and your nervous system as the communication network, the brain is constantly gathering information, deciding whether you're safe or in danger, and then sending messages through the nervous system to every single part of your body. So your heart rate, your breathing, your muscles, your digestion, all of those emotions are based on those messages. So EMDR, when Kat does the hypnosis, that just brings your 10 out of 10. Hey, I'm super upset about this. My body responds. I can feel it in my breathing. That brings it down to 0 or as close to where you don't have those huge visceral responses. And if something comes up, you think, you know what, I'm okay just as I am. I don't think that way about myself anymore. Well, guys, if you take nothing away from this week, I want you to take away that you weren't responsible for the trauma you experienced, but you are responsible for your healing. Research shows that the moment you decide your past no longer determines your future, your brain literally begins physically building a neural architect to prove you right. And Kat and I hope that today is that day for you. So tune in next week, and we're going to talk about how people actually heal from trauma. Thanks for being here at the Kitchen Shrink. We're really glad you showed up today. Be kind to yourself and stay connected. We're Kat and Kel, and we're here for you. Real talk, real tools, real life.